In this final recording for Intermediate Access Unit 1, we're going to be talking about lookup fields. Once again, I'm going to be using my pizza orders database. If you didn't follow along in the first two recordings, it shouldn't hamper you in any way here, and I already have this open. And let's pretend that I want to add a new order. Customer came in, placed an order, so I come down here, I press tab, and it was done today. And now I need the customer's ID number. Well, these numbers don't mean anything. The fact customer number 131, that doesn't mean anything. Right? These ID numbers, they're only used for linking. So how do I get them in here? Well, I could switch to the customers table, go find my customer, look up their number, and then type it in here. But a better way to do that is to use lookups. And so that's what I'm going to describe how to do today. We're going to go into design view here for the orders. Sorry, design view. There we go. And here's my customer ID. And instead of a number data type, by the way, you need to set that first. Instead of the number data type, I'm now going to change this and use the Lookup Wizard, but the Lookup Wizard is still going to be storing the number type. So I'm going to use the Lookup Wizard, and the first thing I get is an error because this table is linked to another one. I cannot create a lookup. Seems odd to me, but that's the rule, so I'm going to go to the relationships. And I'm going to try to delete this relationship. To delete the relationship, you click on the line, notice it get a little darker, and then press the delete key. And this is another very common mistake that I make, so I want to show it to you. If you want to delete this, you can't because table orders is open in design view in this tab, and by another person, that would be you. Right? And so you can't delete this. So I'm going back to table orders. I'm going to go to data sheet view. Then go back to my relationships and delete this again. So if you get a message saying you can't delete it because it's busy, it's you, you've got another tab open, you can close the tab or just switch to datasheet view. Then you can delete. No, you can't because it's even open. That's terrible. All right, close it. Now one more time, delete. You sure? And finally it's gone. Okay, close this and save my relationships and come back to orders and design view. And now try this customer, change it to a lookup again. Okay, Lookup Wizard walks you through the process. This is not something I recommend. I have never built one without the wizard. A lookup. I've never built one without the wizard. It's complicated enough that I don't recommend it. So I recommend you use the wizard. The values that I want to look up can either come from another table or I can type them in. Well, these are customers that I want to look up. They're in the customers table. So I'm going to choose the customers table. And now you get to pick which fields do you want to display in the lookup. A lookup is just a combo box. It drops down a bunch of values that you can choose from instead of making the user type them. You must always choose the primary key. I generally choose it first. The book's going to do a couple of examples where you choose it second. Then I want the customers, and then I have to figure out, well, what do I want to know about the customer so that I can figure out what his ID number is. I want his first name and his last name. I'm double clicking those so that it jumps them over here. You could also use the arrows. Okay, so that's what, you usually keep this pretty minimal, right? Just enough so that you can figure out what a customer ID number is based on their name. I don't need their phone number to figure that out. Next, how do I want to sort this? I don't want to sort by last name, but a lot of my customers have the same last name, so within last names I want to sort by first name. That should make finding a customer a little easier. This next wizard says, all right, what order you can rearrange these and change the order. We'll do that a little later. You can also resize these. The book has you size them to fit. Double click. Some of those, if the text goes all the way to the edge, I recommend you make it a little bit bigger so that it looks better in the lookup. In the book, most of the examples have you not hide the key column. So I'm going to bring the key column back again, even though it's recommended. I'm going to resize it so it just fits. I'm going to show you what this does, and I'm going to show you a different way to handle it when we're done. All right, so here's all my ID numbers. Notice they're sorted by last name, and I don't have any examples here, I don't think, where there's duplicates. Brown, Bush, two Clintons. So yeah, they're sorted by Bill and then Hillary, so that works out okay. So in this column, in this wizard, you get to rearrange the columns. If you put them in the wrong order, you can click them and drag them to a different location, but I'm going to leave it where it is. You can decide whether or not you want to show the key column. Finally, you have to designate, okay, we've got all this stuff in the lookup. What is it that you want to store in this field, in this table, and the answer to that is always the primary key. Always the primary key. Next, what do you want the label for the column to be? I'll go with customer ID. Okay. And then notice there's an opportunity for you to enable data integrity. So I'm going to turn that back on again. Remember, I deleted the relationship. This is going to recreate that relationship just for this lookup. And when it recreates the relationship, might as well recreate the data integrity so that we don't have those orphan records. Finish, and then save. Now things don't look a whole lot different here, but if we go to the view, right, now we can see the customer ID. It still doesn't look a whole lot different, but watch what happens when I enter a new one. When I come to this column, there's now a drop down, and when I drop it down, there's all my customers sorted alphabetically, and I can scroll through this list and pick whoever I want, and their number is stored in there. So their name is available to help me figure out the number without me having to go over to the customers table. But what I don't like doing it this way is it still puts the number in here, and if I want to look at this and say, look, this person ordered a lot of pizza, who is that? Well, it's easy, relatively, because notice 131 is automatically selected. It's Tom Cruise here. So it's relatively easy to find out, but wouldn't it be even better if the name appeared here? And there is a way to do that. Before I do that, I do want to show you one other thing. I want to go back to design mode. And I want to show you how, if you want to look at this lookup and see what it did, how do you do that? Select the field, customer ID, and choose the lookup tab down here in the field properties. Okay. And notice all this stuff that was built. How wide are the columns? How many columns are there? Which one is being saved in the database? That's bound column. Okay. How many rows do we list at one time? How wide is the whole list? And here's the important part. This is a command. It's an SQL command. SQL is structured query language. It's a language that's behind the scenes in Access. In order for Access to do that lookup, it says, go to the customer table, TPL customers, and get me the customer ID, first name and last name of all the customers. And if we jump to the end here, it says, order by customer last name, comma, customer first name. When you do your homework assignments, I strongly encourage you, after you've built your lookup, that you go into the lookup tab, check the row source, and make sure the order by clause is correct. A lot of times, for some reason, I don't know what's up with that wizard, there's a couple of places where it doesn't remember, and it puts the key back in there. If need be, you can just type the column name in there. You can also make other edits here if you wish. For instance, what if I decide that I want to see the last name and then the first name? Well, I can pull them out of here. So I'm going to try to do this strategically. I'm going to pull the comma all the way to the end of the last name and cut it. So Control X. And then I'm going to strategically place it after that square bracket and paste it. And now I have order ID, comma, last name, comma, first name. And now if I go back to design view and save it, and now I drop this list down. Notice I don't have to go to a new record. Drop the list down. I have the last name first and then the first name, and that might be a little handier. So that's the way the book does it. But I want to show you what I consider a better way. Whenever I do lookups like this, I always first create a query that contains my lookup data. Instead of using the wizard, I still use the wizard, because all that other stuff needs to be filled in. But before I use the wizard, I create a query. I want to look up customers by name. But notice when I drop this down, the customer name is in two separate columns, and that's not awful. Right? But it would be better if maybe they were joined together, Gall, comma, Volker. And what would be even more appropriate is if the Gall, comma, Volker showed up in here under the customer column. We could move the ID number to the other side, but then just the last name goes in there and I don't get to see the first name. So this, I think, is a better technique. I'm going to create a query. So I'm going to use query in design. I'm going to use my customers table because I want to look up customers. I need the customer ID. And then I'm going to create a calculated field, and this is way back to Access tutorial 3 from beginning Access, a calculated field that concatenates, and depending on your instructor, you may not have learned how to concatenate text fields. Concatenate simply means stick them together. So I want the last name, and I'm going to create a calculated field on that. So I'm going to hit the builder. If I can find it, there it is. There's the builder. And just to make this a little easier to see, I'm going to zoom in on it. Hopefully this works okay. And there's my customer last name. Just going to leave my mouse there and I'm going to start typing. I want to concatenate the last name to the first name. The way you concatenate is use either the plus sign in Access or the ampersand. Either one of those two, not both. I'm going to use the plus sign. And then I want a comma in between my first name and my last name. If you don't put that in there, then the first and the last name are smushed together and they're all crammed together, and that's not bad, but it doesn't look very professional. So I'm going to force Access to, first of all, concatenate a comma and a space to the last name, and then concatenate the customer first name. And again, I'm getting some help here. It went away. That's all right. We'll just type it at the end of that. Another power tip, I'm going to press the home key, and I'm going to put in my name here for this field. Customer name. Remember from beginning Access that the field name, that's the field name for a calculated field. The field name must come before the calculation. It must be separated from the calculation with a colon. Okay, so I think that formula is okay. So I'm going to get rid of my zoom here and click on OK. And then press enter, and I didn't get any errors. If you get errors, you're going to have to look at that formula, compare it to mine, and see how that works. Now these are how I want them sorted, so I'm going to sort by customer last name, by customer name, but because they're last name, first name, I'm basically sorting by first name and last name. So here's the formula one more time: customer name, last name, concatenated to a comma and a space, concatenated to customer first name. Remember, the comma and the space are surrounded by quotation marks that tells Access to put these exact characters in my results. Let's run the query, see what we get. Okay, there's my customer name column, and there's my names with the commas and the spaces. Everything looks copacetic. So let's save that. I'm going to put my prefix in here. Remember from the first recording that starting in Unit 5, Access starts using the database standard naming scheme where you put a prefix on to designate what kind of object this is. This is a query object, and it's for customers, and I put a capital LU at the end for lookup. This is only used for customer lookups. Save it, close it, and now I'm going to modify my order lookup. So I'm going to Design View, and I'm once again going, I can modify it here, but I don't think I want to do that. This is going to be significantly different. So I'm just going to go to the wizard and run through the wizard again. It's still part of a relationship, and we've already learned that we can't do that with this open, so we're going to go back to the database tools, relationships, and delete the relationship again. Close this window and open that in Design View and run through the wizard one more time. I still want to look up the values from a table or a query, in this case a query. Next. I'm going to select my queries. There's my query. That's the query that I want to use. Now, because this is a custom query only for this lookup, these should already be in the right order, so I'm just going to send them both over at the same time. And you could still have multiple fields here, but I generally look up with 2, at most 3 fields. Always have to have the ID and then whatever you want to use to look up customers. How do you want to sort these? I'm not going to sort. The query has already sorted them. So I don't need to sort them here. You could drop this down and sort by customer name, but it's really redundant. You don't have to sort by customer name because it's already sorted in the query. This only works if you're using a query. Now back to this dialog, but notice the hide the ID is missing. It's not there anymore. That's because this is a calculated field. Because it's a calculated field, that option doesn't appear. But I don't want the customer IDs to appear. These numbers mean nothing to anybody. Let's just hide them. Best way to hide them is simply shrink them down, took the field size and shrunk it all the way down. Make this as big as it needs to be, maybe a little bigger. These are already sorted in the right order. And finally, where do you want to store it? You still, even though you've hidden it completely, you still store it in the customer ID field. What label do you want? When I'm done with this, the column is going to show customer names, not ID numbers. But database experts might be a little nervous because they know that behind the scenes it's got to be an ID. So what I do here is use something a little more generic, just customer, not customer name, but the customer name is what appears behind the scenes. The customer ID is what gets displayed or gets stored, so I just change it to something generic. Finish. Let's see what that looks like. Save it, and notice now instead of those lame ID numbers, I see the names. What you can't see here, what you can't know, is that what's really stored here behind the scenes is a number. In the actual table itself, there's a number, but because of my lookup, I'm hiding that number so the people who use this don't have to look at them. I can resize the field as always, and if I'm adding a new customer, I simply drop the list down and say, which customer? Those numbers don't mean anything. They don't need to be part of the list. It's nice for this list to be in alphabetical order, though. Click on it, add it to the list. And again, when we save this record, Denny's ID number is going to be saved, not his name. It's a little tricky, but it makes data entry more accurate because you're more likely to get the right customer ID number in there. One other thing you can do with lookups is improve the data entry. You might remember in the first recording we added data validation. Let's go to design view for the pizza size to say it has to be one of these, large, medium, small, personal. But the user still has to type it all. What I can do instead is turn this into a lookup. But I'm going to type my own values. There's no table. By the way, that's another design technique, is to put the sizes in a table. So if you want to add a size, simply add it to the table and poof, it shows up. But in this case, I don't have a table, so I'm just going to type those things in. Access wants to know how many columns do you have? Only one. And you type the values that you want in the order you want them to appear, capitalized the way you want them to appear. Large. Oops, don't press enter, press tab. Small and personal. Next. Notice we don't have to designate what field we're going to store. There's no keys. There's only one field. I'm going to capitalize the name. And this is important. I want to limit to list. I want to limit the user to only entering in values that are on that list. Finish. Let's see what that looks like. Design view. You want to save the table? Yes. All right, and let's add a new record one more time. And now when I come down here, actually let's just modify Eli Whitney's order here because there's no size specified. I can type, and notice it automatically fills things in, and then because of my mask, it automatically capitalizes it. And the mask really is redundant now, because when you have a list and it has to be picked from the list, it will automatically capitalize it. So the nice thing about this pick from list, and there's my list, the nice thing about this pick from list is now the mask and even the data validation are redundant. If I type something in there that is not on the list, I get an error from the list, not this error message. Let's do that real quick here. If I come in here and say this pizza size is a small, delete the last L and try to leave, the text item you entered isn't on the list. That's understandable. So we drop down the list and pick what we want from the list, small. And we're done. But all that other data validation, the mask, all the rest of that stuff really isn't necessary anymore if you use lists. When it comes to these tools, masks, validation, lookups, you have to use them in the appropriate order. Last thing I want to do to wrap this up is to restore my relationships. Okay? The relationship here is gone. Now I could have, and I missed that step, I could have said when I built my lookup that I want to define this relationship here. Okay? Customer to customer. But there's no way to do that when you're using a calculated field. So I dragged this over there and said that's the customer, they're related. This customer, even though it looks like a name, is still the ID number. Enforce the integrity, update, create, and now I've got my, and it's open again. Darn it, I do that just about every single time. Close that. One more time. Turn on the integrity and create. Now I have, the only reason we really need to do that is for the referential integrity, to make sure we don't have orphans, to make sure we don't have orphan orders, orders for people who don't have a corresponding customer. That doesn't make any sense. We can't have customers without orders. Could be a new customer who hasn't ordered anything yet. But we cannot have orders without customers, and referential integrity ensures that. So when you do these lookups, it's generally a good idea to turn that referential integrity back on. Even if you click the little checkbox, remember our first example, it gave us the option. Even if you click the little checkbox, you want to come in here, right click this, edit the relationship, and turn on the cascading updates. All right, so that's creating a lookup field. My way is to use a query. That's not necessarily the way, that's not the way the book's going to show you, but I think it's a better way when you do the book assignments. I think I have an extra credit in there for you to create your own custom lookup, but most of the time you do lookups the way the book needs to do it. But I wanted to show you another way in case it comes in handy for you.